She returned to her childhood home, expecting dust, memories, and silence. What she found instead was evidence, carefully hidden, and never meant for her eyes. Old journals, marked maps, names of women who had vanished without crimes, without reports, without goodbyes. At first, it looked like her father had been investigating disappearances. Then she realized something worse. He wasn't documenting crimes, he was documenting a system, a town where people didn't disappear violently. They were quietly pushed out, isolated, pressured, forgotten, and everyone knew. The neighbors, the church, the landlords, the leaders. When Eleanor started asking questions, the town noticed. Warnings appeared, records vanished, and then she learned the truth. Her father hadn't been exposing the system. He had been part of it, until the day he refused to choose. Now Eleanor had the same choice. Stay silent, or burn the illusion down. She chose documentation. And Briar Hollow was never invisible again. When Eleanor Whitman turned 38 and inherited her late father's old Victorian house at the edge of town, she expected memories, dust, and a lifetime of forgotten furniture, but nothing prepared her for the discovery that would rewrite her understanding of her own life. The house was quiet, eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Each creaking floorboard and swaying chandelier whispered secrets that Eleanor could almost feel pressing against her consciousness. And it all began with the attic. A small wooden door at the end of the hallway, locked and unremarkable, painted the same faded beige as the walls. Nothing to suggest the life-altering contents it contained. She remembered how, as a child, she had never dared to open it, how her father always smiled and told her it was for grown-ups only. Now, standing before it in the winter light that streamed through frosted windows, Eleanor felt a shiver of anticipation. Her fingers traced the edges of the key she had found hidden in a drawer, marked miscellaneous under layers of brittle envelopes and photographs. The metal was cold and slightly rusted, but unmistakably the key to the attic. When the lock clicked open with a reluctant groan, she pushed the door slowly, revealing stairs that smelled of old wood, mothballs, and something else, something that felt like forgotten memories waiting to be remembered. The narrow staircase creaked under her weight as she ascended each step, echoing in the silence until she reached the top, where a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, covered in a thin layer of dust, casting shadows across stacks of old boxers' trunks and covered furniture, all of it perfectly preserved, untouched for decades. Eleanor's eyes fell upon a desk against the far wall, papers strewn across it as if someone had left in a hurry. Letters tied in bundles with faded ribbons, journals with cracked leather covers, and photographs in black and white, each telling stories she could almost hear in the quiet of the attic. As she sifted through the papers, she realized that the letters were correspondence between her father and unknown figures, hints of disputes, secrets, and locations she did not recognize. While the journals chronicled events in the neighborhood that had been hushed, unsolved incidents involving missing women, burglaries, and small disappearances that seemed insignificant at the time, but when viewed together, revealed patterns. Eleanor began to understand that the attic was not merely storage for old belongings, but a repository of hidden truths. Evidence carefully preserved by her father. In one corner, she discovered a small box with a lock inside another lock, containing photographs of her childhood friends, images of neighbors, even photographs of people she had never met, all with marks, notations, and dates that didn't make sense until she realized they were connected to incidents she had read about in the town newspaper, events that had always puzzled her, unsolved crimes. Continuing to examine the attic, she found maps marked with locations in her town, addresses underlined, streets circled, and annotations in her father's handwriting detailing movements, comings and goings, and precise times. It dawned on her that her father had been keeping a meticulous record of local happenings that no one else had noticed. Somewhere, under a pile of letters, she found a journal addressed to her written in her father's hand, explaining why he had hidden these things from her, warning her of dangers that lurked in the shadows of their quiet town, and telling her that she was now the only one who could piece together the puzzle he had left behind. Eleanor sat on the wooden floor, the dusty light bulb swinging faintly above, realizing that her life had changed irrevocably. The attic had become the threshold to a story she had never known, a story that would demand courage, intellect, and persistence. As the first stars appeared in the winter sky outside her attic window, she made a silent vow to uncover every secret, every hidden correspondence, every shadow of mystery her father had painstakingly recorded. For the town was no longer just a place to live, it was a canvas of secrets, and Eleanor Whitman was its new keeper. Eleanor did not sleep that night. The house felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were aware that their secrets had been disturbed. Morning light filtered through the curtains, but it did nothing to quiet the questions racing through her mind. The attic journals sat on the dining table, stacked neatly, their cracked leather covers hiding decades of silence. She began with the oldest journal. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, precise and deliberate. The early entries seemed harmless at first. Notes about neighbors, small observations, who left for work early, who returned late, which houses stayed dark after midnight. It felt like a habit, almost obsessive, but not criminal, until patterns emerged. Several names appeared repeatedly, always women, always over 30, widows, divorcees, women who lived alone or had predictable routines. Eleanor felt a tightening in her chest as she recognized some of them. One had been her school librarian. Another ran the local bakery. All of them had vanished quietly over the years. Moved away, people said. Started new lives. But the journals told a different story. Dates were underlined. Locations circled. Her father had noted the last time each woman was seen. Who spoke to them? What changed in their routine shortly before they disappeared? There were no accusations written, no conclusions drawn. Just facts. Cold, methodical, waiting to be understood. Eleanor cross-checked the names with old newspapers archived online. Most of the articles were small, buried in local pages. Resident Hellococh's woman leaves town unexpectedly. No follow-up. No investigation. The town had accepted absence as normal. Her father had not. As Eleanor read deeper, she realized he had tried to report his concerns. There were copies of letters addressed to local authorities, marked received, then ignored. Notes beside them read, dismissed as coincidence. Another line appeared repeatedly in the margins. Too quiet. Too easy. The most disturbing entries were written years after Eleanor had moved away for college. Her father had continued alone, watching, recording, protecting her by omission. In one entry, he wrote that speaking openly would make the truth disappear faster. Silence, he believed, was safer than exposure. Then Eleanor found the ledger. Unlike the journals, the ledger contained no commentary, just columns, dates, names, locations, outcomes. Some entries ended with a simple word, confirmed, others were left blank. Those blanks unsettled her the most. She noticed something else. Every woman listed had lived within walking distance of the same abandoned property near the edge of town, a house that had been condemned years ago but never demolished. Eleanor remembered it. Children were warned never to go near it. Adults avoided discussing it altogether. Her father's final journal addressed this place repeatedly. He believed it was a meeting point. Not for violence, for persuasion. Conversations that changed decisions. Agreements that were never spoken aloud. Eleanor felt anger rising. These women had not vanished. They had been guided, pressured, quietly removed from a town that did not tolerate unpredictability. The journals suggested something darker still. Some women resisted. Those entries stopped abruptly. No outcomes recorded. No confirmations, just silence. Eleanor realized why her father had locked the attic. He had been protecting more than evidence. He had been protecting her from knowing that the town itself was complicit. That neighbors she trusted had chosen comfort over truth. That disappearances were not crimes of passion, but crimes of convenience. By evening, Eleanor made a decision. She would visit the abandoned property, not to confront anyone, not yet, just to see if the place still existed. As she drove past familiar streets, she noticed how ordinary everything looked. Families, walking dogs, lights turning on at the same hour. Predictable, safe, controlled. The abandoned house still stood. Its windows were boarded, its yard overgrown. But the driveway was recently disturbed. Tire marks, fresh. Eleanor parked across the street and watched. Someone entered through the side door. Not a squatter, not a vandal. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. Eleanor did not follow. She wrote one final note in her father's journal that night. I understand now. And for the first time since inheriting the house, she felt certain of one thing. The secrets were not buried in the attic anymore. They were active. Eleanor did not return to the abandoned house the next morning. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She went back into town and began talking to people who had known her father, not directly about the journals, not about the women. She asked harmless questions, casual ones, the kind that don't raise alarms. How was my father? Really? During his last years, most answers were polite, surface evil, quiet man kept to himself. Always polite. But Eleanor noticed something else: hesitation, a pause before answers, eyes drifting away, as if everyone was careful not to say too much. The first real crack appeared at the local grocery store. Mrs. Caldwell, a woman in her late 50s, had lived in the town longer than Eleanor had been alive. When Eleanor mentioned one of the names from the journal, casually like recalling an old neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell froze, just for a second, but it was enough. She moved. Mrs. Caldwell said quickly. Too quickly. Did she? Eleanor replied gently. I don't remember a goodbye. Mrs. Caldwell lowered her voice. Some people don't get one. That night, Eleanor reread the journals with new eyes. Her father hadn't been documenting crimes. He had been documenting decisions. Pressure applied quietly. Social isolation. Fear disguised as concern. Women being convinced they were unsafe, unwanted, or watched until leaving felt like the only option. And the town helped. Church groups stopped visiting. Neighbors complained anonymously. Landlords raised rent. Employers suddenly restructured. No violence, no threats. Just a slow, suffocating push outward. Eleanor began to understand why police never intervened. There was nothing to arrest. Nothing illegal. Just coordinated silence. On the third day, Eleanor received an anonymous note under her door. Stop asking questions. No signature. No threat. Just a warning. She should have listened. Instead, she visited the public records office. Buried in old zoning files, she found something chilling. The abandoned property near the edge of town wasn't abandoned at all. It was owned by a trust. A trust managed by 5 individuals' respected names. Donors, community leaders, people who sat in the front row at town meetings. One of the names made Eleanor's stomach drop. Her father. He had been listed as a trustee until 5 years before his death. His name had been removed quietly. No explanation, no replacement. That was when Eleanor realized the truth. Her father hadn't been investigating the system. He had been inside it. That night, Eleanor confronted the journals again, this time searching for omissions instead of notes. And she found them. Entire months missing. Pages torn out cleanly. Events that clearly happened but were never written down. He had stopped documenting when documenting became dangerous. Or when he began resisting. The next anonymous message arrived by text this time. You don't understand how this town survives. Eleanor replied before fear could stop her. Then explain it to me. The response came almost immediately. Come alone. The address was familiar. The abandoned house. Eleanor arrived just before sunset. The sky was bruised purple, the air unnaturally still. She parked where she had last time and walked toward the side door. It opened before she touched it. Inside, the house was not decayed. It was maintained, clean, furnished, sparsely, like a waiting room. 5 chairs sat in a circle. 4 were occupied. They did not look like villains. They looked like neighbors, like people who believed they were doing the right thing. We protect stability, one of them said calmly. We remove risk, said another. Some people don't fit, a third added. Eleanor asked the only question that mattered. And the women who refused to leave. Silence. Finally, the oldest man spoke. Your father refused to choose. That was the moment Eleanor understood his death had not been natural. They hadn't killed him, they had isolated him. Just like the women. As Eleanor stood to leave, one of them offered her a deal. You can stay, continue his role, or you can go. Tonight, Eleanor smiled. My father didn't fail, she said. He documented everything. Their faces changed. Fear, because Eleanor wasn't alone anymore. She had already sent copies. Eleanor did not leave town that night. She drove past the edge of Briar Hollow, past the familiar streets and quiet homes, until her phone signal faded. She stopped only once long enough to make a call from a prepaid phone she had bought that morning. No names, no explanations, just files transferred. Securely, irreversibly. When she returned to the house, the porch light was on. She hadn't left it on. Inside, nothing was disturbed. No signs of forced entry. Just a single envelope placed neatly on the kitchen table. Her name written in careful handwriting she did not recognize. Inside was a typed letter. It didn't threaten her, it didn't beg. It explained, Briar Hollow, the letter said, had always believed in prevention over punishment. In quiet solutions, in protecting the majority from disruption. The women had not been criminals or victims-only variables. Unpredictable elements in a system designed to remain stable. They were not removed, the letter claimed. They were encouraged to choose elsewhere. Eleanor folded the letter slowly. That word, encouraged, had followed every disappearance, every silence, every missing goodbye. By morning, the town felt different. Police cars idled near the abandoned house. 2 unmarked vehicles sat across the street. People stood farther apart at the grocery store. Conversations ended when Eleanor entered a room. The files had landed. Journalists didn't arrive all at once. They never do. First came a single inquiry, then another, then a request for comment from a regional paper that remembered an old disappearance no one had solved. The town council issued a statement. Calm, reassuring, promising internal review. By the third day, one trustee resigned for health reasons. By the fifth, zoning permits were frozen indefinitely. By the seventh, a state investigation quietly began. No arrests were made. There rarely are, in cases like this, but systems began to fracture. Emails leaked. Old complaints resurfaced. Anonymous testimonies appeared online. Women who had left Briar Hollow years ago, all describing the same feeling. Pressure without fingerprints. Fear without threats. A town that closed ranks when you stopped fitting in. Eleanor packed the last of her belongings at dusk. Before leaving, she returned to the abandoned house one final time. The chairs were gone, the room empty, as if the meeting had never happened. In the basement, she found something new. A journal that was not her father's blank pages. Fresh binding, waiting. Eleanor left it there. Some stories don't need another recorder. As she drove away, Briar Hollow shrank in her rearview mirror. Still quiet, still polite, still standing, but no longer invisible. Years later, people would ask what finally destroyed the system. They would expect and expose a hero, a courtroom victory. The truth was smaller. Documentation, patience, and one person who refused to stop asking questions. Briar Hollow still exists, but no one disappears there anymore. And Eleanor never returned.